everyone, this is Jade here with Mark Lyons. He will be presenting about Heavenly Dairy products. He has a slideshow and he also has handouts at this link below. He will also, or I will also have this link available at the end of the slideshow, and we will have it available on our Facebook page as well. So I will turn things over to Mark now.
Great, thank you, Jade. I'd like to welcome everybody to our presentation tonight, Heavenly Homemade Dairy Treats. When a lot of people think of things you can make with milk, a lot of people think about cheese and maybe a few other things, but most people don't stop to think that they can actually make some of these things themselves, and that's what I'm going to be talking about today. And among the handouts that you'll have access to at the end of the presentation are some recipes for making things like butter, cheese, Devonshire clotted cream, sour cream, yogurt. So you'll be able to try your hand at some of these when we're all done. And I will encourage everybody to do that. All right, a little bit about me. Oops, let me change to slides here. A little bit about me. I have been making my own cheese for about the last, 7+ years. I got my start when I was on a 2-week vacation in Vermont, and I was visiting one of the working dairy farms. And as I was perusing their bookstore, looking through some of the, or I should say the gift shop, looking at some of the books, I found this little number. And as I was thumbing through it, the moment of madness came over me and a voice whispered in my ear and said, "Wouldn't this be fun to try?" And when the madness had left, I discovered that my arms were one book heavier and my wallet a few dollars lighter. How that happened, I have no idea. Well, I started making my own cheese, and then I kind of, from there, segued into making my own butter, my own sour cream, my own yogurt, and other things too. So, as I said, that's what we're going to be talking about today, how you can do that yourself. And as I said, when it's all over, I'm going to encourage everybody to go home and make their own dairy products. By the way, I should also mention that I also have 6+ years experience as a management consultant, which essentially means I'm qualified to tell people what to do. All right, what we're going to talk about today is a little bit about the ingredients that are used in making different dairy products. We're going to talk about some of the equipment that's used, and then talk about some of the dairy products themselves and some of the history and things behind them. All right, let's talk about ingredients. And the number one ingredient, surprise, surprise, is milk. Milk, you can see, if you break it down, is mostly water, but it's got some milk sugar in it, also known as lactose, has a little bit of fat, a little bit of protein in the form of casein, that is the milk protein, and then a small amount of various minerals. Now, what happens to milk when we coagulate it to make things like cheese and yogurt and sour cream is if we add a coagulation agent like rennet, it causes the casein in the milk to unite with the ash, the protein, the casein, to unite with the ash, and this produces what's known as calcium caseinate. In layman's terms, that's also known as curd. Curd is insoluble, so it comes out of solution, and you see the whitish curd. And then when you separate out the curd from the liquid portion of the milk, also known as the whey, then depending on what you do with that curd, depends on what you get. If you compress it and let it age, you have cheese. If you put some different bacteria to it, that's when you get things like the sour cream and the yogurt and things of that nature. Now, most people, when they think of where their milk comes from, we're familiar with cows and goats and sheep. But cows and goats and sheep throughout history has oftentimes been a luxury for many people. And so they've had to make use of the milk from other mammalian species. And here's just a sample of some of the different, excuse me one second here. Shut that off. Of some of the different animal species that we've gotten milk from. We've gotten it from this critter here. The Bedouin tribes of the Middle East got their milk from the camel. The Laplanders of Finland, I'm sorry, the others got it from the caribou. There's the llama, the elk. The Laplanders of Finland got their milk from the reindeer. The mare, water buffalo. Milk from the water buffalo is traditionally how mozzarella cheese was made. So those are just some examples. So if you don't have access to cows, sheep, and goats, then you may have to make do with one of these others. Although I sincerely doubt that anybody has access to zebu milk. Now, milk usage has a long history. I'm going to stop sharing for just a moment here. Milk usage, as I said, has a long history. Goats were most likely the very first dairy animals ever domesticated. Archaeological evidence suggests that some of the ancient peoples in what is now Iran and Iraq were selectively breeding them as far back as 8,000 and 9,000 BCE. Goats are small and sturdy and able to eat just about anything you put in front of them. They're generally easier to keep healthy and happy and milk producing, especially in cool mountainous climates. That's not easy to do with cows and sheep. Several goat breeds also have hair that can be shorn and used for clothing. So the goat is kind of a good dual purpose animal used for both the milk and the hair. Also, goat milk has an excellent nutritional value for what you have to put into it. As the concept of domesticating and milking animals spread from the Middle East, farmers adopted local beasts, some of which we've already mentioned, as their milk-giving ruminant of choice. And depending on things like the climate, the geography, and the population, various regions favored yaks or buffalo or cows or sheep. The ancient Hebrews held milk in high favor. The earliest Hebrew scriptures contain abundant evidence of the widespread use of milk from very early times. The Old Testament refers to a land which floweth with milk and honey some 20 times. The phrase describes Palestine as a land of extraordinary fertility, providing all the comforts and necessities of life. In all, the Bible contains some 50 references to milk and milk products. So for those of you who happen to be very religious, you should be using milk and milk products, because if it was good enough for the ancient Hebrews, it should be good enough for us. Now, all species have their own special adaptations that make them better for certain environments and needs. Cows, for instance, were domesticated from the longhorn wild aurochs around the same time and place as goats. Since at least 3000 BCE, they've been bred primarily for their milk, which tends to be richer than goat's milk, and due to the size of cows, much more abundant. However, cows being heavy eaters with a grass diet, they work best in temperate climates, as opposed to goats, which are best in more mountainous climates. Now, generally, milk comes from ruminant species, with one exception, the camel. The camel is the only milkable domesticated animal that isn't a ruminant, and camels were particularly adapted to arid desert regions. So as a result, their milk has been a staple food in parts of Africa since about 2500 BCE. China is one of the very few old world societies that didn't develop some sort of reliance on milk. Most likely this had to do with the local flora. Much of the natural vegetation in China, particularly during the rise of ruminants, consisted of poisonous plants like wormwood and episode, making it unsuitable for grazing. However, when nomads and later the Mongolians came bearing milk, the Chinese were very quick to take up the beverage. And by 1300 BCE, they were using milk to dilute their tea. Okay. Hang on one second. I'm going to share my screen again. Okay. Some general guidelines for milk that you're going to use to make cheese or yogurt or anything like that. You want to make sure to use only the freshest and best quality milk. If you use supermarket milk, make sure that you do not open the container until you're ready to start using it. Otherwise, the milk can start to lose quality very quickly. And remember that if your milk has a sour taste or an off flavor, do not use it. You're not going to get good yogurt or good cheese from bad milk. Like anything else, garbage in, garbage out. Let's talk about some of the different kinds of milk. Cow's milk is the most popular for making cheese and butter and yogurt and other things here in the United States. The best kind of cow to use for getting your own milk and making your own products, if you're so inclined and able to do that, is to buy a Jersey cow. Jersey cow's milk has a very high butterfat content that will produce a high yield of dairy product. The animals themselves have a very sweet temperament. Now, another good cow to use for milk production, for making cheese and sour cream and yogurt, is the milk from the brown Swiss cow. The brown Swiss is the cow of choice over at Shelburne Farms in Burlington, Vermont. Goat's milk. Goat's milk has smaller butterfat globules, which are more easily digested. So for people who have a hard time with cow's milk, goat's milk is usually a good alternative. Goat's milk is naturally homogenized. By the way, homogenization of milk, if you're not familiar with why we do it, is done in order to keep the cream from rising to the top. Some of you might have grandparents who can talk about how when they were young, the milkman would bring the milk to their doorstep in bottles and the cream would rise to the top. That's known as cream-line milk. Homogenized milk is milk that's been heated and pressure treated to keep that cream in solution. Goat's milk, you don't have to do that because goat's milk is naturally homogenized. Because the cream doesn't naturally rise, if you want to get the cream out of goat's milk, you have to use a cream separator. If you want to buy your own goats for milking purposes, the Nubian, the Alpine, the Sayans, and the Toggenburg are the best breeds of goat to use for milking purposes. Sheep's milk. Sheep's milk is probably the driest of the three, cows, sheep, and goats. Sheep's milk is very high in protein and vitamins. It also contains about 10% less water than cow's or goat's milk, which means it has twice the level of solids that you'll find in either cow's or goat's milk. It gives you 2.5 times more cheese, more yogurt, butter than anything else. So if you want a milk with a very high yield of product, sheep's milk is definitely what you want to use. There are very few milking breeds of sheep here in the United States. The only milking breed of sheep that you can get is the East Frisian. There are others, the Manchego sheep, which is how you traditionally get Manchego cheese. Unfortunately, they're in Spain, and we do not have any Manchego sheep here in the United States, and you cannot get any because the USDA takes a dim view of importing livestock across the pond. All right, let's talk a little bit about culture. Culture is basically the bacteria.
Hi guys, we're having a bit of technical difficulties right now. Please bear with us. Hey Mark. Okay, it looks like we lost Mark. It might be a connection issue. Let's give him a few moments to come back in. On.
There, I think we lost. I lost you there.
Yep, I'm here. I lost you there.
Okay. I'm terribly sorry. I think. Wait a minute. My. Okay. Yeah. I had my my plug plugged in the wrong place. So my apologies. All right. Let me go back to sharing again. Sorry about that, everyone. Okay. Culture. Culture is basically the bacteria that we add in order to get the milk to start coagulating. Culture is, there's different kinds of bacteria that you want to use. Milk naturally, raw milk has natural culture in it, natural bacteria, microflora that can be used to make milk. Most of the milk that we buy is pasteurized, so the process destroys all of the bacteria in it, so we have to add our own bacterial culture. So that's what's used to coagulate milk. And if you bear with me over here, I'll just show you some examples of different kinds of culture. This is a culture for buttermilk. By the way, I get a lot of my my stuff from the New England Cheese Making Supply Company of Burlington, Vermont. They're a one-stop shop. They have all the different kinds of cultures you need for just about anything. If I wanted to make creme fraiche, another dairy product, I would use this culture. Creme fraiche contains lactose bacteria, S. lactis, S. cremoris, and some other ones, whereas the buttermilk contains other different kinds of culture. So depending on the bacteria that you use is going to determine what happens to your milk, how it coagulates, and the different kinds of product that you get. All right, now if you're making cheese, you're going to use another product known as rennet. Rennet is simply something, it's a substance that's used for controlled coagulation of milk. The enzymes in rennet will act on the casein, the milk protein, and cause it to unite with the calcium, which I mentioned earlier, creating calcium caseinate, also known as curd. When you separate that out from the liquid, the whey, you get, you have the curd separate. Then when you compress it, either by the force of gravity or through applying pressure in a press, and then you age what's left, that's what you get, that's how you get cheese. Rennet comes in a liquid form, like this product here. It's kind of hard to see, but it's kind of a liquid with a slightly yellowish tinge. You can also buy it in tablet form and powder form. Now, rennet comes from the fourth chamber of a cow's stomach. Many years ago, when the way people would make cheese is when they'd slaughter a cow, they'd save that fourth chamber, and they would hang it up and let it dry, and when they were ready to make cheese, they would just slice a piece off of it, toss it in the milk, and it would coagulate it. Cows are ruminants, and they digest milk a little bit, they digest food a little differently than we do. Human beings and other single stomach animals are known as monogastrics because we only have one chamber to our stomach. When we eat food, we chew it up, we swallow it, it goes into our stomach, the acid breaks it up, goes into our small intestine, which has enzymes there that break it up further. Cows and other ruminants do it a little differently. A cow will grab some blades of grass, chew it slightly, and swallow it almost whole. It will go into the first chamber of their stomach, known as the rumen, hence the name ruminant, where bacteria will break it apart and synthesize things like B vitamins, volatile fatty acids, and amino acids. And then after a while, the cow will belch up that mixture and will start chewing it. That's known as chewing the cud. The cow will then swallow the cud. It will go into the next chamber, the reticulum, which is a honeycomb structure where bacteria can further break it apart. Then from there, it goes into the omasum, and then from there, the abomasum, which is very similar to a true stomach. That's where you have the enzymes that break apart the mass of food. And this is what the fourth chamber of a cow's stomach looks like. I'm going to imagine that some of you are probably saying yuck right now. All right, equipment. There's all different kinds of equipment for depending on what you're making. I'm not going to really go into great detail about it, but you have things like dairy thermometers for measuring temperature. You have cream separators for separating the cream from the rest of the milk. And if you're using something like goat milk, you have different kinds of pots depending on if you're making cheese, you're going to need a cheese press and different things like that. All right, let's start talking about some of the different dairy products that you can make. Starting with butter. Butter is simply nothing more than butterfat, water, milk, and milk proteins. Put all three of those together, and you've got the stuff that we spread on our toast every morning. Butter is fairly simple to make. It's probably one of the easiest dairy products to make. All that is required is that you separate the cream from the milk, and you want to store that cream in a cool place for several days. And then you'll pour that cream into a churn, and then you will agitate it. The agitation process will cause the solids to coagulate together and separate out from the liquid, which is the traditional buttermilk. You can do that at home very simply. Take a mason jar, take some heavy whipping cream, and you simply pour the heavy whipping cream into the mason jar. Then you will put the lid on. What did I do with the ring? You'll secure it with the ring here. This is the lid. Here's the ring. You'll simply secure it. And then you will just start shaking it. And just keep shaking it and shaking it until the butterfat finally separates. And when it's all said and done, you will get butter. And you can further, have fun with it. You can add different flavoring. You can add herbs and make your own herbal butters. You can choose to have salt, make it a traditional salted butter, or have it unsalted, which would be for those of us that have high blood pressure and are trying to avoid salt. You can make your own unsalted butter. So there's all different kinds of butter. I talked about some of them. There's the traditional sweet cream butter. There's ordinary sweet butter. And then there's ghee or clarified butter. Ghee or clarified butter is used a great deal in Indian cooking. Generally, butter, as a rule, in order for it to store and keep longer, was clarified. Buttermilk. Buttermilk is traditionally what you have left over after you have churned butter. Lost the rest of my notes here. Buttermilk is traditionally what's left over after you have churned the butter. Yeah. The buttermilk that you see here is known as cultured buttermilk. That is created by taking half and half and adding your buttermilk culture to it and allowing it to heating up the milk, adding the culture, allowing it to set overnight, and then in the morning you separate out the liquid and you've got cultured buttermilk. The buttermilk that you get from churning butter, that is the real thing. That is the stuff that looks like this. And the great thing about it is that after you've churned your butter, you can take the leftover buttermilk and use it to make your very own buttermilk pancakes. Yogurt. Yogurt is what you call an accidental food. It was something that was never intended to be created, but it was through a happy circumstances of events gave you what was known as yogurt. And I'm going to stop sharing for just a moment here. Yogurt, the shepherds of Arabia and Syria, they would skim off the cream or remove the lump of butter that the cream had formed. They'd have skimmed milk left over. Back in the desert sands of the Middle East, they wouldn't have easy access to refrigeration. So the skimmed milk was under a blazing Middle Eastern sun. It wouldn't take very long for the milk to turn acidic, ferment, and curdle. And as a result, you get yogurt. Yogurt is a great way to preserve the nutrients from milk because the yogurt could then be sun-dried or stored fresh under a layer of oil. Long before the health food craze hit the U.S., yogurt fans were already extolling the medicinal properties of yogurt. A medical text dating to 633 Common Era dubbed yogurt therapeutic. Recorded history states that Genghis Khan, the founder of the Mongol Empire, and his armies lived on a diet of yogurt. Yogurt was introduced to Europe by a Turkish doctor as a medical treatment, and it saved the life of French King Francis I, curing him of his stomach troubles in the 16th century. A Russian professor, Ilya Mechitkanov, was the person most responsible for bringing yogurt to the Western world. Yogurt is one of the easiest milk products to make. Some claim that it's beneficial for a long and healthy life. Now, yogurt, in addition to just being used as a beverage, many times you can cook with yogurt. There are many recipes that call for it. Here's a tip if you're going to cook with yogurt. You want to make sure that you spare the heat. You want to keep the temperature below 120 degrees Fahrenheit in order to keep the culture alive. So if the recipe calls for yogurt, it's much better to stir it in at the end of the cooking process. For example, say to thicken a soup. Because if you cook yogurt for a long period of time, the yogurt will separate. Now, you can avoid this separation by adding a stabilizing mixture. You'll basically combine half a tablespoon of flour or cornstarch with 1 tablespoon of milk or water, blend that into a paste, mix in 1 pint of yogurt, heat that over medium heat, stirring it continuously in one direction until it comes to a boil. Then lower the heat, let it simmer until it thickens, which will take about 5 minutes. Once you thicken it, then this yogurt can be safely cooked and will not curdle. So there's 2 ways you can work with yogurt. You can either use a lower temperature, add it at the end so that it doesn't separate, or you can follow the procedure I just mentioned to stabilize the yogurt. And that way you can put it in at a much higher temperature and it will be just fine. Cheese. cheese is essentially defined as coagulated milk. It is basically the curdled, ripened, coagulated milk, which is then, or the curd, which is then separated out from the whey and then compressed and aged in order to create cheese. There are many, many different kinds of cheese. The former president of France, Charles de Gaulle, once remarked, how do you expect me to keep order in a country that has 300 different kinds of cheese? Cheese can be very simple to make, or it can be very complicated, depending on the kind of cheese you're making. Soft cheeses are the simplest to make. And probably the simplest of all the soft cheeses is queso blanco. To make queso blanco, you simply take milk, heat it up on your stove to about 190 degrees, put in about a quarter of a cup, or a half a cup rather, of cider vinegar. That will cause the milk to coagulate. Then you take a piece of butter muslin, you pour the coagulated milk into the butter muslin over a colander, and then you tie the corners together to make a bag, let the bag hang, and after all the whey is drained out, you now have queso blanco, which is a very easy cheese to use if you're making Mexican dishes. It's especially a good cheese to use because it has a very high melting point, as opposed to many other cheeses which melt at much lower temperatures. Here's an example of a cheese that I made. This is a Parmesan cheese that I've aged for about 2 years. And I've done that to make a hard grating cheese out of it. This is not meant to be used as a table cheese. This is a cheese that you'll cut off a section and use a grater to grate it into a salad or pasta or something like that. Generally, when you're using a grating cheese, you want to make sure to only grate what you need to keep it fresh. So there are a wide variety of different cheeses that you can make. One of the more complicated cheeses is Cabra al Vino, which is also known as the drunken goat cheese. This is essentially a goat cheese that's infused with wine. And it is a cheese that will take you all day to make, because after you coagulate the milk, then you have to separate out the curd from the whey, then you have to put it in a press, then you have to turn it over like every 15 minutes or so. But then after you do all that, then you have to age it for a few days, then you have to soak it in the wine, then you have to age it some more, and then give it a second soaking, and then you have to age it for a few months. So it's a much more complicated cheese. Devonshire clotted cream. Let me back up a second about cheese here. Cheese, as I said earlier, is a food consisting of the coagulated, compressed, and usually ripened curd of milk separated from the whey. The word comes from the Middle English chesse, from the Old English kesse, and from the Latin caseus. Cheese is one of the earliest foods known to mankind. It dates back to initial domestication of animals in 9000 BCE. You can find references to cheese in the writings of the Sumerians, the Egyptians, and the Chaldeans. By 2000 BCE, cheese had become a luxury item in Egypt, with recipes heavily guarded by priests and manufacturing scenes appearing in murals decorating kingly burials. So it was definitely considered a food of royalty, or a food of the gods. In biblical times, cheese was considered a staple, along with almonds, honey, and wine. Cheese was an important food for the ancient Greeks. The deity Aristios, who was the son of Apollo, was considered the giver of cheese. Homer sang the praises of cheese in the Odyssey. Greek Olympic athletes trained on a diet which cheese made up a large portion. And if our Olympic athletes are not bringing home enough gold medals, then may I humbly suggest that they start eating more cheese, because if it was good enough for the Greeks who invented the Olympics, then it should be good enough for our Olympians. The Romans picked up the art of cheese making and refined it. The Romans, picking up on Greek tradition, gave each of their soldiers a daily 1 ounce cheese ration. The Romans also invented things like smoking cheese, adding herbs and spices, and using curdling agents other than rennet. In Europe, cheese making branched into 1,000 local specialties that incorporated regional products and production secrets. For example, real mozzarella, the real honest-to-goodness traditional style, also known as mozzarella di bufala, is made in the Campania region south of Rome from milk supplied by the 100,000 descendants of a herd of buffalo brought to Italy in 7000 CE. The very first cheese factory opened up in 1815 in Bern, Switzerland, and the very first American cheese factory was established in Rome, New York by Jesse Williams. Take good notes, there'll be a quiz later. Just kidding. In 1840, to celebrate Queen Victoria's wedding, the farmers in Somerset, England, made a cheddar measuring more than 9 feet wide and weighing 1,100 pounds. And an even bigger cheese than that, back in 1801, the townspeople of Cheshire, Massachusetts, created a cheese weighing 1,200 pounds, which was presented to Thomas Jefferson in honor of his presidential victory. Now, the variations in color and texture and flavor of different cheeses is due to the variations in time, temperature, and bacteria. Also, the amount of time that we age it. Generally, the longer you age a cheese, the sharper the flavor. So a mild cheddar is a cheddar cheese, for example, that's been aged maybe only a few months, whereas a sharp cheddar has been aged maybe for several months, longer, or maybe even a year. Cheeses can be aged for as short as a few weeks, all the way up to 2 years or longer. Devonshire clotted cream. That's this wonderful stuff over here. Devonshire clotted cream is a scalded, thick, buttery cream with a nutty caramel flavor. It's associated with the dairy farms of counties Devon and Cornwall in England. Devonshire clotted cream was originally made by farmers to use up their excess milk. The milk would be left to stand for several hours so that the cream would rise to the top. The cream was then skimmed and placed into pans that were floated in trays of boiling water. The cream will then thicken and develop a golden crust. Nowadays, instead of letting the cream separate naturally, farmers will use a cream separator to get out the cream. Devonshire clotted cream is an essential ingredient in making Devonshire cream teas. Creme fraiche. Creme fraiche is a matured, thickened cream with a rich texture and a nutty, slightly tangy flavor. The thickness can vary from sour cream thickness all the way to margarine thickness. Creme fraiche is easily made in France from unpasteurized cream, which has all of the necessary bacteria. Here in the US, where nearly all milk is pasteurized, you have to, if you want to make your own creme fraiche, you have to take the milk, you have to add a little sour cream or buttermilk and then let it coagulate overnight. Or you can add a creme fraiche starter culture to half and half. second. Creme fraiche can be used as a topping for fruit or for pancakes. Creme fraiche also goes well with a hot loaf of sweetbread stuffed into figs. Kefir. Kefir is known as the champagne of milk. It's a fermented milk product. The word kefir means good feeling or pleasure. Mountain people believed that kefir had healing properties and was a gift from God. Kefir was originally not very well known in the West, but kefir has been consumed for years by Europeans, especially in the Caucasus region of Russia. Kefir is similar to yogurt, but it differs from yogurt in the fact that whereas yogurt only undergoes lactic fermentation, kefir undergoes both lactic and alcoholic fermentation because there's yeast in there as well. So kefir contains about 2.5% alcohol. When you make kefir, it yields a sourish, yeasty, sparkling end product. Also, you heat the milk to a much lower temperature than for yogurt making, so more of the nutrients are preserved than you would find in yogurt. Kefir is a nutrient powerhouse. The fermentation process makes vitamins and minerals, etc., very bioavailable, which makes it easier for the body to absorb and digest them. Kefir also contains a greater quantity of probiotic bacteria, much more so than yogurt. You can serve it as a drink or use it to make smoothies, cheese, or a yogurt-like product very similar to Greek yogurt. There has been some research to demonstrate that kefir has cancer-fighting and blood pressure-reducing properties. This has not really been demonstrated on a consistent basis in humans. Kefir may have some aid in digestive health. Again, it contains probiotic bacteria, which is good for our gut. Kefir also contains lactase, an enzyme which breaks down lactose. So for those who are lactose intolerant, kefir might be a little bit more digestive because kefir contains the enzyme which breaks down that lactose. Back in 2003, a study of 15 adults unable to digest lactose, this was done at Ohio State University researchers, they found that drinking kefir reduced lactose maldigestion symptoms, the bloating, stomach pain, and the gas, by almost 70%. French researchers also produced similar findings. They also showed that kefir can speed the recovery from diarrhea in infants. Sour cream. Sour cream is created by fermenting regular cream with specific types of lactic acid bacteria. So if you wanted to make your very own sour cream, you would use this little stuff, this sour cream culture. And again, you can purchase all of these cultures from the New England Cheesemaking Supply Company. They're on the web at cheesemaking.com. There are other different kinds of, there are other places where you can buy culture and other things for fermentation, but the New England Cheesemaking is a one-stop shop, and you can pretty much find everything you need over there. Anyway, the bacterial culture of for making sour cream causes the cream to both sour and thicken. The sour taste in sour cream comes from the lactic acid produced by the bacteria. Regular sour cream contains roughly 18 to 20% butterfat. There are also lighter versions that contain 40% less butterfat. They're made with both a combination of milk and cream. Commercially produced sour cream may contain other thickening agents, gelatin, rennet, guar gum, carrageenan. But if you don't want any additives or preservatives, then I recommend making it yourself. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, everybody will get handouts or will have access to them where they can go and make their own butter, cream, cheese, sour cream, etc. So you'll have a chance, instead of just listening to me talk about it, to go home and do it yourself. And that pretty much is your key to making heavenly dairy products that you can enjoy with yourself or share with your friends and your family. If you have any questions after the presentation is over and I don't get to them today, here is all my contact information. I run a business called Green Thumb at Your Service that mostly is involved in helping people with their gardening, with their vegetable gardens, both with new and existing gardens, for individuals, businesses, houses of worship, etc., etc. But I occasionally, in addition to teaching classes about gardening, I also teach classes, as you see tonight, about making dairy products, making your own cheese, things like that. So if you have any questions, feel free to email me at mark@greenthumbAtYourService.com. You're welcome to check out my website, which lists future classes. You can like me on Facebook. You can connect with me on Google. Check out my blog. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram and link with me on LinkedIn. So that is pretty much all I have to say. So at this point, Jade, I will turn it over to you and take everybody's questions.
Thanks, Mark. So everyone, I have the URL to the handouts scrolling across the bottom of the screen now. And I'd like to kick off the questions with one of my own.
Okay.
How do you make the multicolored cheeses? Like Colby, I think. Is that the one that's kind of modeled orange and white?
The orange and white Colby, yeah. There's different ways of making it, and I'm going to cheat here just a moment, and I'm going to refer to the book that I told you earlier. Bear with me just a moment here.
Oh, and while Mark's looking for that, he's reading, he's referring to the book called Home Cheese Making by Ricky Carroll, which is available to check out at Willard Library.
Okay. In order to make Colby, you would need to purchase a artificial cheese coloring, and there, if you read the home cheese making book, there's a recipe in there for making Colby, and it pretty much tells you. Rather than waste time and read the whole thing, part of it is you're going to cut the cheese into 3/8 inch cubes. And so some of those cubes will be colored and some of them will not be. And then when you press the whole thing together, that's when you'll get the different shades of color throughout.
Okay.
Now, one thing I will mention is that the milk that you buy in the store is pure white. And goat's milk is also pure white. Raw cow's milk has a yellowish tinge to it, because the cows are eating a lot of substances that have carotene in them. Carotene is the natural precursor to vitamin A, and that gives a yellowish tinge to the milk. When milk is pasteurized, homogenized, and all that, a lot of that color is processed out of it.
Okay.
So goat's milk does not contain any carotene, so goat's milk will always be pure white.
Okay.
It was a long-winded answer, but did I answer your question, Jade?
Yes. It looks like we have a question from Amy.
Yes.
Amy asks, can kefir help people digest milk if they are lactose intolerant?
The question is, can kefir help people digest milk if they're lactose intolerant? My answer to that is probably maybe, because if you start adding in pure milk to the kefir, then you may be introducing a little bit more lactose than the enzyme in the kefir can digest. The whole reason for drinking kefir is for those people who can't tolerate regular milk. Kefir is simply milk that has been processed in such a way. It's got the lactase enzyme, it's got the probiotics and other things to make it a milk product, a milk derivative, which is much easier to develop or easy to digest than regular milk. You can try drinking it with regular milk to see if it makes a difference. I would start with small quantities of milk if you're going to try that. Don't take a big swig of kefir and then a big swig of milk and go back and forth like a two-fisted drinker and see if it will work. Start slowly and see if it'll help. So again, that's my long-winded answer. The true answer is I'm not 100% sure. Experiment and see if it will work.
She says, thank you. Now, a question that I posed to everyone was, what's their favorite cheese? And now I'm going to ask you that. What's yours? Out of all the ones that you've made, what's your favorite?
Oh, that's a very good question. What is my favorite cheese? I guess if I had to pick a cheese, I guess I would have two favorites. Number one would be Manchego, because it was the very first hard cheese I ever made. Up until that point, I'd only been making soft cheeses. But when all my soft cheeses started working out right, I figured, all right, let's go for it. And I splurged. I bought myself a cheese press, and I made myself a 2-pound block of Manchego. And I gave it to my parents, and my father, being one of the toughest food critics ever, who doesn't like anything, said he liked it. So I knew if he liked it, it had to be good. My second favorite, and I should mention that the Manchego that I made isn't traditional Manchego, because again, that's made from the milk of the Manchego sheep, and there are no Manchego sheep here. So I made it with cow's milk. And so when you make it with cow's milk, then it becomes Hispanico. So, but anyway, I digress. My second favorite cheese is the Cabra Alvino, the drunken goat cheese, simply because I just like the way it tastes. It's something that's unusual that you don't see very often. And I get a lot of compliments on it when I present it at my live cheese making presentations. Which, by the way, I would love to do for your library someday, as soon as we get all done with the whole COVID thing.
We'd love to have you sample and everything.
So that's my answers. My two favorite cheeses are Manchego, or Hispanico, actually, since I have to make it now. And the Cabra Alvino. Now, if I wanted to get close to traditional Manchego, I would have to get sheep's milk from somewhere. It would be East Frisian sheep's milk, but it would still be a sheep's milk, so it would be closer to the real thing than making it with cow's milk.
Okay. And I guess the last question I have is, if we were going to make these, I would say the more exotic cheeses, is there a way to, I guess, import the milk from those exotic animals here, or would that change the quality of the product?
The question is, can you import the milk from other countries to make the different kinds of cheeses? That is a difficult thing to do, because as any of you who's ever traveled abroad and tried to come back with fresh fruit or anything like that, only to get stopped at customs by the USDA people or the customs investigators and basically be told to throw it in the trash. The USDA and the US government takes a dim view of importing fresh product, whether it's fruits, vegetables, milk, etc., from overseas, because there's a fear of bringing in exotic pests. And the fear is justified, because that's how the gypsy moth, the Asian longhorn beetle, and others has got into this country. So they're very leery about that. In order to import that milk, you would have to get special clearance from the government. You would have to fill out forms. You would have to do all kinds of stuff. And then you would have to find a way to pay to have it imported in a special cooler to keep it fresh. So it's probably more trouble than it's worth.
Okay.
If you want to do it, good luck. Or maybe you can you can pay somebody to smuggle it in. If you do, then I'll be sure to visit you in prison. I'll bake you a cake with a file in it and stuff like that. So.
Question.
We had a comment here that drunken goat cheese is amazing for grilled cheese sandwiches. And what is my favorite way to use mozzarella? I generally eat mozzarella. I'll either eat it fresh, I'll put it on a sandwich. I have made the 30-minute mozzarella, and you can buy a 30-minute mozzarella kit from the New England Cheese Making Supply Company. It's a very quick way to make mozzarella. And I usually use that recipe in my classes, my hands-on classes. And because it's a great cheese to make within a 2.5-hour class period. Anything else I really can't make because it requires aging or long periods of time to make. So, as I said, I like to use mozzarella fresh on a sandwich. I'll just have it as a snacking cheese. And that's how I like to use it. And I've never thought about using the drunken goat cheese on a grilled cheese sandwich, but now you've given me something to think about. And next time I want a grilled cheese sandwich, just using old boring cheddar, I'll try using the drunken goat cheese. So, are there any other questions?
Okay.
Then before we let everybody go, I'm going to leave you with this. Oh, dairy isn't scary. You can make it yourself. You don't have to buy it from the grocery shelf. There's butter, yogurt, sour cream, and cheese. And friends, you can milk it for as much as you please.
Thank you. Wow.
All right. Again, if you have further questions, you are welcome to email me. I'll bring up all my contact information one last time here.
Pull that up too.
There it is. You can copy it down. Or if Jade, if people don't get a chance to get it, they're welcome to email you, and you can email me, and I think you have it from all the emails that we've exchanged back and forth. So if anybody doesn't get it, contact Jade, and she can forward all that to you, and then you are welcome to contact me with your questions. Also, again, once we're all done with the pandemic, have Milk Will Travel. If you ever want to do a cheese making or a dairy making party, feel free to get your friends together. Give me a call. I'll drive out, and we'll spend the day making cheese, butter, yogurt, whatever.
All right. Thank you for everything, for your knowledge and your song.
You are very welcome. I also have a presentation just strictly on making cheese. I go into much more depth on cheese making than I do in this presentation. During the presentation, I'll actually demonstrate making a very simple, soft lemon cheese. The one thing that my online presentations lacks is opposed to the live presentation is that I give people samples of the homemade cheeses I've made for them to taste, which unfortunately we can't do over StreamYard. So, but like I said, if once the pandemic is done, I would love to come out and do this program or the cheese making one live.
Yeah, we'd love to have you again. Just a reminder, everyone, we have the link posted on our Facebook, and we also have Home Cheese Making by Ricky Carroll for further recipes.
And Jane, I'm glad you brought it up because a lot of times when I do this presentation or the cheese making one live, when I usually bring that book, I'll always ask the coordinator, the librarian, whoever, do you have this in your library? And if you don't, you should, because it's really a good starter book for making cheese. That's how I got my start. Ricky Carroll does an excellent job of explaining everything. She talks about a lot of the stuff that I talked about, the history, the techniques, the equipment. And Ricky Carroll is also the founder and the president of the New England Cheesemaking Supply Company. So it's, as I said earlier, it's a great place to go.
Hold on the book. All right. Thank you, Mark. We are signing off now.
All right. Thank you, Jade.